Another larger fish family is our parrotfish when they're adult males. They can be quite robust, again about the size of an American football, or even sometimes a little bit larger for some of our parrotfish. They're going to swim with their pectoral fin just like our wrasse. So not something you can use to positively identify them, but if you look at their face, you're going to find they have a fused beak, just like a parrot. So this species, it looks a little bit like buck teeth here, quite cute. But if you listen and watch them, you will hear them actually scraping that beak across the reef. Now they're going for algae living on top of the dead coral, typically, most species here. So you can actually hear the noise of them scraping the algae off the hard calcium carbonate skeleton and actually getting a little bit of that skeleton as well. So that's what's making the crunching noise. They're not just getting algae, they're breaking down a bit of the reef as well. In their throat, they have specialized teeth that break it all down, grinding it up. So they're mixing the algae and the coral together. Of course, they can't digest the coral, but they're able to digest the algae, and their waste is going to be ground up, clean, white sand. Yeah. So they're actually very, very significant in creating this sand. You would think, oh, what a few parrotfish do. But if you think about the hundreds of them that are on the reef, they're actually creating quite a bit. They say an adult male can produce somewhere between 300 and 1,000 pounds of sand a year. So next time you see one of these white clouds, look ahead, you might find a parrotfish. And next time you're wiggling your toes around in the sand, you know who to thank. We have our friendly parrotfish. There are a few species that do eat living coral, and they're going for the algae living within the tissue of that coral. So here we see some bite marks, but it's not usually significant, and they're very selective. They're not going to eat an entire coral head. They're just going to scrape away some parts. So this is the species. It's called a bullet head, pretty big parrotfish. Sometimes you can see eating the living coral. Very classic example is our bicolor here. This is the female. So they're all born female, dusky in coloration. And then when the need arises in the harem, so they live in groups of about 7 to 12 individuals, and they have a male with them. When the need arises, the largest female will turn into this male. Brilliant teals and pinks. They look a lot like parrots, where they get their name. So here are a school. Here's a school of a bunch of females swimming about together, and you can still hear them picking at the reef, but they're all going to be kind of dusky in coloration, looking a bit like the wrasse, where it gets tricky. But if you look at their face, they're still going to have the little beak in the front. Okay, next fish family that's on your guide, this is the last one we'll have for you on the guides, is the angelfish, probably the most beautiful fish we have out there. They're going to have an oval body shape. They're going to be usually a little bit larger in size and a bit more robust on this side. Scientists or ichthyologists, people that study fish, look at the spine on their gill plate covers, what gives them away. But when you're looking at a fish like this, it's really hard to notice a spine on the gill plate cover because they're so beautiful. Bright yellow with this blue, powder blue accent is our lemon peel angel. Now they're smaller. They're about the size of your palm of your hand, and they're very shy. You'll only find them tucked in next to the coral. They don't really go swimming around in the water column very often. But a gorgeous fish, and you can see the little spine on the gill plate cover there. A bit larger is our regal angelfish, about the size of a salad plate, but a classic angelfish, bright blue spine on the gill plate cover. And last example I'll share is the emperor angel. This one is reserved mostly for our divers. It's a big angelfish, can be the size of a serving platter, and attracted to divers when they have some fish in the water, maybe feeding the sharks and whatnot. You'll see the emperor about picking up some scraps. Last fish family, which is not on your guide, so you have to take mental notes. We're testing you at the very end here, is the triggerfish. Now this is going to have the pointed oval body shape. They can be pretty large, over a foot in length. They're going to have the two-part dorsal fin, is where they get their name. The front one, being a spine, is the trigger, and then the rear fins are going to be what they swim with that wave-like pattern. The most popular and common example is our Picasso triggerfish. This is the one that looks like the Hawaiian state fish, right? But this one is slightly different. Bright blue headband, yellow eye, and it has these black and white stripes that look like they've been painted with a paintbrush. Now, they can be quite territorial. I'm not saying all Picasso triggers are going to try to chase you away, but some will, especially in their nesting season. You're going to find them over the sandy bottom, usually, where they're scooping up mouthfuls of sand and looking for little invertebrates and worms to eat. If you do scare them, though, they will run into a hole here, or swim into a hole, where they're trying to get their trigger on the other side of the coral. Now this trigger will then lodge them on the inside of the coral, and a predatory fish would not be able to pull them out. So it's part of their defense. But it's also a warning mechanism. You know, a predatory fish seeing a spine would think, oh, better think twice before I take a bite out of this fish. So the pigtail trigger here, I took a photograph of using a flash. So here's the first photograph. By the second photograph, he was perturbed, put up his trigger, and even changed color a little bit. With this one, you can really see the rear fins and how they move in a wave-like pattern while swimming. Here are a few other examples. This is the black trigger found around the world. The Titan, the biggest, can be nearly 3 feet, big fish. A small one called the scythe, and then here's the orange lined, a very, very common one. But you can see in his mouth, they do have some teeth. And as I was saying, some of them can be kind of territorial, especially our Picasso. So sometimes they will come and nip at the back of your ankles or your tendons at the back of your knee. They're very clever. They know we have a weak spot in the Achilles. I've even seen a bite on the bum. So if you don't see what's bit you, it's probably a little triggerfish just trying to scare you away. If it's swimming directly at you, it's not coming to say hello. It is really trying to chase you out of its territory. All right, so that's it for our fish families. But I like to include a few other fish that you're definitely going to see if you take your time. They're everywhere on the reef, but they're pretty good with their camouflage and their homes. So the first one is a little blenny that lives in the abandoned homes of Christmas tree worms, about the size of your pinky finger, and goes tail first into his home. So if you're lucky, you're snorkeling slowly, you'll be able to see some of these little guys. Almost every hole has a little fish living in it if you take your time and look. The greasy grouper here on the upper right blends in perfectly with the bottom. So this picture has flash, so you can actually see the spots, but many times you only see the eyes moving around, and then you notice the fish. We do have a bright blue one as well, but most of them are going to be this coloration that blends in perfectly. Just like our lizard fish here, sitting on the bottom on his pectoral fins, and looks a lot like a lizard in the face, but will kind of scoot down into the sand to camouflage themselves. Another individual about the size of your your index finger, but a little bit more in girth, is going to be our hawkfish, sitting on top of the coral. Again, another one you're going to have to sneak up on, but they're also very good with their camouflage. Now, my favorite fish by far, I have to throw him into every lecture just because he is so adorable, is the pipe fish. Now, this is the closest relative to the seahorse that you're going to see commonly here. We do have seahorses, but they're extremely difficult to find. These are far more common. They look like a small snake sitting on top of a little bit of algae, typically. They're not usually resting on living coral. They're living on this fuzzy algae. You can see by the face how it's related to a seahorse here. And just like seahorses, the males are the ones that are going to brood the eggs. So sometimes you can see some have a swollen pouch on the sides here that's full of eggs that they're taking care of. They're about 5 or 6 inches in length though, and they live in very, very shallow waters typically. So if you want to look for the pipe fish, look at algae in water that's about 2 or 3 feet deep. While you're swimming around, it's not totally uncommon to run across some of our silvery swimmers, typically found on the outer reef, but sometimes they're inside the lagoon as well. This is our paddle-tail snapper, very common to be seen on dives, sometimes inside the lagoon. Our trevally jacks are often inside the lagoon, following around our stingrays, picking up whatever they scare out of the sand, and occasionally a barracuda, which is not very common, but sometimes they come inside to have their gills cleaned by the cleaner wrasse. and our emperor fish here, which can be quite large and intimidating, but not at all dangerous. So just for fun, I like to throw in a couple of our juveniles, just so we can have an idea of some of the changes that these fish go through. So this is our midnight snapper. When it's a baby, it looks like an aquarium fish, a couple inches in length. But as he grows up on the reef, he will eventually come out looking like this, completely different. And you remember our emperor angelfish from before with the patterns and its beauty. It's still beautiful as a juvenile, but has completely different lines running through it. They look like this for, until they're about 10 inches in length, and then they start shifting their pattern. Then we have to deal with mimicry. On top of all of the issues of life changes, juveniles, we have some fish that look just like other fish. We have the longfin bannerfish, which is a butterfly, versus our Moorish idol. But in a little bit of murk, it would be very difficult to tell the two apart. On the bottom here, we see the mimic surgeon on the left, and then we have our lemon peel angel. So it's just amazing what happens in nature. This is a baby juvenile trunk fish. So while you're out there, I hope you're really just enjoying taking in all the fish, and you can start picking out some of our fish families. So for our last slide here, we have a quick, I don't want to call it a pop quiz, but just a test for you all, a little test to see if you can pick out the fish families. You can use your guides, you can use your cheat sheets.